That's so fucking awesome. Teenage girl. Oh.
So this next one does require a little bit of explanation. This is from Don't Read This Book, and the conceit of this is that there is an annual convention of all of the monsters in the world, and they get together to make sure that they can continue to feed on human beings and not be discovered. And the antagonist, the villain of the book, is a necromancer who wants to wipe out all human beings because he's a necromancer. He'll be just fine. He can just raise lots of servants from the dead. But he's got to convince the other monsters to agree to his motion that he's going to be making at the convention. And of course, they wouldn't like it if all the humans are dead because humans are their food. So he's got to trick them into agreeing at the convention to support his motion. And he's already gotten the support of some witches and some werewolves, and now he's going to meet the King of Trolls. And so this is the scene where he's going to meet the King of Trolls. And the King of Trolls has a giant facility, kind of a space, underneath a particular address in Manhattan that happens to be the headquarters of Fox News. And when the necromancer goes down into this basement, he sees just rows and rows and rows and rows of thousands of trolls working on computers. And so he makes his way to the stage, and as he does so, he is spotted by some of those trolls, and they start throwing literal flaming pieces of shit at him. And so he makes his way up onto the stage, and that's where we'll begin. Panting, he neared the edge of the catwalk and had a moment of panic when he seemed to be at a dead end. Then he saw the doorway leading into the wall. He wasn't sure where it went, but it would get him out of the direct line of fire. He leapt to his right into the doorway and almost fell down the half-flight of stairs. When he reached the landing between the two flights, he stopped to take a breath, straightened his tie, and listened to make sure the coast was clear. A deep voice cut into the high-pitched screeches, and Nigel knew he'd chosen the right direction. "All right, knock it off." The voice was deep and booming, but not particularly passionate about the subject. "What have I told you about all that? You're going to hit the computers. If any of you set a whole row of desks on fire, and I have to buy hundreds of new computers, I'm going to rip your spine out from the ass end and strangle you with it while you're still alive, you hear me?" Feeling reassured that he was safe, Nigel began to descend the second flight to the floor of the massive room below. But just as he reached the next to last step, one of the computer jockeys chose to send a final salvo in Nigel's direction. The flaming pile landed just outside the lower entrance to the staircase, and the King of Trolls caught sight of it. The king's throne sat on a stage that was elevated 6 feet above the floor in the center of the front of the room. 10 desks stood in front of the platform, facing outward like sentinels. The trolls sitting at those desks managed their respective teams and sent pages, smaller, frightened-looking trolls, up the little stair on either side of the wide edge to deliver messages directly to the king, sitting alone in the middle. When the king saw the last pile of shit land near a staircase in the corner, its guttering flames giving it away in the darkest recess of the room, his black eyes flashed to the workers in front of him, and he spied the troll who was still standing up on his desk, now looking at his king bashfully, his arms held behind his back, the seat making a slow turn so the troll could try to hide behind his own shoulder. The king of the trolls was shaped like the fellow members of his species, only much larger. While their legs composed less than half their height, his made up just a quarter of his, and though he was just as naked, his pendulous gut hung down over his privates. Heaving man boobs rested on top of that gut, a giant swinging second chin hung between those, and his shoulders dwarfed them all. Massive scaled globes with purple hairs so coarse they looked like the spines of porcupines sticking out. His head was sunken down between those shoulders and might have been completely obscured from Nigel's angle, except that the crown, a diadem of silver vines ending in pointed scorpion barbs, poked up between his shoulders and rose a foot higher. Matching silver rings pierced his single thick eyebrow at either end. One decorated his left nostril, and his huge puffy ears sported 6 silver rings each. The king also wore silver rings on each finger, and his hands were enormous. He grabbed for the nearest attendant, and one of those glittering hands wrapped completely around the smaller troll's waist. He hopped out of his throne onto his tiny little legs, gripped the front of the stage with his free hand, and held the screaming troll up in the air. "What the fuck did I just say?" he shouted. Then he threw the unlucky messenger at the troll, who was quickly trying to climb down from his chair to hide among his fellows. The bureaucrat flew a few hundred feet through the air and crashed into the precise desk where the delayed flaming feces originated. But at that velocity, the poor page couldn't stop at one target. He smashed into the thrower, and the two of them continued into the desk behind them, and 2 more beyond that. Bones crunched, computer monitors went flying, and then the trolls around the mess, who'd survived unscathed, started to howl with laughter. They picked up broken chairs, desktops, keyboards, monitors, and even the tower computers in their black casings, and they began throwing them at the injured trolls, jeering and shrieking as they pummeled them. The king of the trolls didn't seem to mind this destruction. "Next time I say knock it off, you knock it the fuck off, won't you?" Then, while still looking out at the workers, he reached out in Nigel's direction with the same massive ringed hand that had hurled one of his brethren and made a come here motion. Nigel obliged. It was a long walk to the center of the room, and Nigel was determined to regain some of his dignity by taking it at an even pace. Meanwhile, the king stepped back, placed his giant hands on the arms of his gray stone throne, and lifted himself back into it, groaning as he let his bulk settle. Then he turned toward Nigel for the first time and addressed his visitor. "I tell you, these little monsters, they aren't what they once were." He was bellowing loudly enough that the bureaucrats and the trolls in the first few rows could all hear him clearly, and that was intentional. "Their daddies, they fought Vikings with their bare hands. They just tear a Viking's arm off and use it as a club to fight more of them. Turn whole raiding parties to jelly and have them for dinner. But these little bastards, they just want to drink Red Bull and eat Cheetos and throw their shit at people all day. You ever see Cheetos in a fire? They burn crazy colors because of the chemicals. Well, you run those and a ton of Red Bull through a troll's gut. Makes our shit burn weird." He looked out at his employees. "If your mothers could see you now, they'd abort every single one of you. That's what you all are, failed abortion shitting Cheetos, the lot of you." He looked down at the desk immediately in front of the stage. "Somebody better make sure that whole mess is cleaned up and everybody is back to work, or in the infirmary in 20 minutes, or I will personally eat you all and you'll be the next pile of flaming shit on the wall, you hear me? And keep your sections in line. Replacing computers costs money. Get your shit together, people." At this point, Nigel was ascending the steps onto the stage, and the king leaned heavily on one arm of his throne, beckoning Nigel over with a conspiratorial wink. When Nigel approached, the king didn't even greet him, just recognized him by including him in his confidence. "Mr. Marion, I tell you, I do my best to make them all feel like a bunch of pussies, but really, they're a lot more dangerous like this than a bunch of scaly apes in caves under mountains, killing the occasional band of Viking marauders. I've built something here that our ancestors couldn't have dreamed of. Have I ever explained how this all works to you before?" Nigel opened his mouth to answer, and the king looked at him for the first time, then interrupted before the necromancer could begin. "But where are my manners? Look at you, you ass-licking, uptight, horse-faced, limey cock-gobbler. How have you been?" "Oh, you know, you tint-faced pig fucker, I can't complain." The king chuckled and casually whacked Nigel with the flick of his wrist. The backs of each finger were the size of a man's fist, and this gesture would have knocked a human into the wall behind him, but Nigel felt the impact as a genial tap it was intended to be, and he didn't budge. He looked out at the rows and rows of trolls hammering on keyboards. "It is quite the operation. What are they working on exactly? Gun running? Human trafficking? Drugs? Internet gambling?" The king shook his head. "Comment sections on social media. Trolls gonna troll, as they say." Then he looked at Nigel. "Human trafficking? You sell me short, Mr. Marion. How many people can that hurt? 50 million a year, maybe? Weapons sales. The number of dead in armed conflicts worldwide is around 100,000 a year, and it keeps going down. That's no way to create chaos. Drugs? Half of them are downers, and the humans are learning to give people treatment instead of going to war with each other over drugs. Diminishing returns in the chaos department there too, I'm afraid. No, this is where it's at, my zombie fucking friend. Mass media. I've been growing chaos this way for a century, and things just keep getting crazier and crazier. It's a troll's paradise out there. And do you know how it works? This is the part that's so fucking brilliant. Know how it works?" Nigel just raised his eyebrows. "Accidents. A billion accidents slamming into a billion other accidents, multiplied by stupid algorithms that can't even tell they are accidents. Human misunderstandings, magnified by the ignorance of artificial intelligence, compounded by evolutionary errors. Noise. Volume." The king looked up at the ceiling and placed his claws against his chest. "See, I watch what the Nazis did with the media. Now I know, everybody always says, the Nazis, when they want the worst example. But they were humans, really fucking bad, but but we're the monsters, not them. We can be worse. So I saw what they did with movies and TV and radio. They took these new technologies and they weaponized them when the technologies were too young for the German people to have built up defenses. If Hitler had just used newspapers and books, no dice. People would have read his nutty ideas and said, this guy is just a loon. But they didn't know what to make of the radio lying to them because they weren't used to it. And movies, those tapped into parts of the humans' brains that the newspapers couldn't. But the Nazis failed because they were too disciplined. They had an end game,
All their propaganda was systemic, focused on getting people to agree with their one stupid program. So they get a Holocaust out of it, big fucking deal. And then what? Not this.
He swept an arm out over the crowd.
I'm not making that mistake. Because it turns out if you want humans to start yelling really crazy shit and then doing really crazy shit, all you have to do is make it so they're yelling all the time. It turns them into assholes. And this, what you see in front of you, this is an asshole-making machine.
So all these trolls are doing what? Nigel asked.
Just ramping up the volume, turning the knob to 11. That's all we have to do. Imagine you had, say, 100 humans in a room, and they're all just sitting around and talking to each other in low voices. And one is saying, I think we should all go get some dinner. How about tacos? And another is saying, let's go to a movie. How about a funny romantic comedy? And another saying something really fucking radical, like, hey, if we can afford it, maybe we should come up with a system where everybody gets all the health care they need, even if it means some people have to pay more than others in taxes. Even then, people are just talking. It's orderly and fucking boring, and nobody is throwing their shit at the walls. And we trolls hate that. So what do?
Well, I guess you could.
You shout at them!
The king bellowed in Nigel's ear. Well, his tap hadn't been painful. Nigel found even his superhuman ears could be hurt by the giant trolls yelling. The king laughed at the pained look on Nigel's face, then continued in his conspiratorial voice.
If it's just one person shouting, everybody just looks at them like they're crazy. But you don't have one person shout. You have a whole team. You assign one to shout, you want to eat tacos? I fucked your mother right in a taco last night. You have another shout, romantic comedies are for pussies. And the one you want to see has homos in it. And then you get the third person to shout, you're a commie who wants to kill all the rich people. And you know what the humans will do?
They'll start shouting back.
Exactly. And pretty soon, you've got everyone shouting. And they aren't just shouting about food and movies and public policy. They start shouting about everything. And if someone says in a quiet voice,
Pardon me, but maybe we should all stop shouting?
No one can hear her. Just to be heard, she has to shout, you're a murderer. Meanwhile, somebody else is shouting, 2 + 2 is 5, and the government doesn't want you to know it. And somebody else is shouting, only I can save you from all the evil people who are shouting all the time. Follow me. And then you know what they'll do?
Nigel thought about his meeting in the woods with Apo and his werewolves, the way they responded to his absurd volume with their own. He nodded at the king. They start throwing their shit at the wall.
Right, and worse. So many people are shouting murderer that they actually overlook a little murder. A little stealing over here, a little rape over there. What, they blew up a hospital? Not as bad as what that guy was shouting about. Build some concentration camps? Not as bad as what she was yelling about. And the people shouting start to gang up into groups. Anything the other group shouts about is a lie. And this group has to shout louder to drown out the other group's lies. Who cares what is happening in this group? Because what about that group? Hey, did you notice that guy taking a shit in his hand and throwing it at the wall? No big deal compared to what they're doing over there in that other group. Plus he's on my side, so it's fine. And next thing you know, it's shit and bullets and dicks flying everywhere.
The king nodded slowly, reverently at his army of trolls.
That's what we do. We find people saying reasonable things and we rile them up. Somebody says, the police shouldn't kill black men just because of the color of their skin. We jump in there and say, see, you want to kill all the police. It doesn't take long before someone is saying, we need to have a race war to protect white Americans. And somebody else is saying, we need to kill all the police to protect black people. Because those are the only ideas that get any attention. Everyone else is too boring. No likes, no hearts, no follows. See, the humans are social animals. Evolution designed them to get little endorphin hits when they get social approval. This little feature helped them a lot. It maintained pack cohesion when they were wandering around gathering berries. It kept their tribes together when they were hunting woolly mammoths. It built their cities by making them happy they were inside the walls and afraid of getting thrown outside the walls. And we hijacked this need. If they want to be happy now, they have to write something like, the moon isn't made of cheese, motherfuckers. It's made of my cum because I was thinking of John Wayne when I whacked off into the sky. Yeah, that would go viral. They would get their endorphin fix. We make them need the attention. And then
the king turned toward Nigel so fast his huge ears wobbled, and his crown nearly fell off. He grinned a particularly wicked grin, licked his teeth with his bright pink tongue, and lunged toward Nigel, as though he would bite him with the next idea.
And then the fear sets in. It's an even better motivator than the pleasure. The happiness just gets them hooked. The fear of losing that keeps them stuck. These humans evolved in groups of 60. They can't handle disapproval from more than a few people at a time. They may have 1 million people reading what they write and not feeling strongly enough about it to like it, but if 5 people start talking shit about their idea, their little Neanderthal brain starts thinking they're gonna get kicked out of the berry picking pack, and they freak out. So how we get white people to think they're the oppressed minority, or men to think they don't have as much power as women, or Christians thinking their religion is gonna be wiped out in America? Just a few negative comments matter more to them than all the positive ones. The humans online all think they're just one internet comment away from being thrown over the city walls, and we ramp that up too. We keep them engaged in the backlash against someone else, so they will fear being the target of the backlash themselves. We remind them, this dragging, this could be you. They bully because they're afraid of being bullied. It's just backlash after backlash. A bunch of scared parrots screeching the same memorized phrases at the top of their lungs while we throw flaming shit at them. The king sighed. It's beautiful.
That's awesome.